All right, today we're going to unpack a really bold legal argument from researcher Abdullah Hakim Kenneth Basnight. The idea that the U.S. justice system is so fundamentally broken it can't be fixed from the inside. And the only solution, he argues, is global intervention. Now that's a massive claim, so let's dive into the evidence he presents.
So this is the heart of it, right here. The argument is that the U.S. system is devoid of justice from its inception. Think about that. So fundamentally flawed from the very beginning that it literally can't fix itself. So if that's true, the only solution has to come from the outside, from the international community.
So what on earth is the evidence for a claim that radical? Okay, to really get our heads around this, we're going to look at three main pillars of the argument. First, the history behind it all. Then, the money, the economic incentives that keep the current system locked in place. And finally, the legal playbook for how a global solution could even work.
All right, let's start with part one. This whole argument goes right back to the very beginning. We're talking about the U.S. Constitution itself and the idea that it has a kind of original sin, a fundamental flaw that's been there for over 2 centuries.
Okay, now here's a statement that'll probably make you do a double take. The central idea here is that the 13th Amendment, the one we all learn about that ended slavery, well, the argument is that it didn't actually abolish it. Nope. Instead, the claim is that it just gave slavery a new legal home.
And it all comes down to this one little phrase, this massive loophole, except as a punishment for crime. According to this analysis, this wasn't just some minor detail. It was a constitutional backdoor that allowed forced labor to just keep on going, only now it was all perfectly legal, just under a different name.
So you can see how this argument traces that evolution over time. After 1865, plantation slavery didn't just vanish, it morphed. It became convict leasing, then it became chain gangs, and eventually it became what the source calls the modern prison industrial complex. The packaging changed, but the core product, forced labor, is argued to have stayed exactly the same.
And to back this up, the analysis goes right back to the Constitution's roots. It was a document written by and for men who were deeply invested in slavery. You have clauses like the 3/5 Compromise, the Fugitive Slave Clause, all designed specifically to protect the institution. It's all part of that void from inception argument.
Okay, so if the flaw is literally baked into the Constitution, the next logical step in this argument is that the entire system is designed to protect itself, right? And if that's the case, then trying to fix it from the inside, well, it's argued to be pretty much impossible.
And this is what that self-perpetuating cycle looks like according to the source. You've got the legislative branch writing the laws, the executive branch enforcing them, and the judicial branch upholding it all. And who does this all feed? A profit-driven prison industry that then turns around and lobbies the legislators to keep the whole thing going. It's a closed loop.
So, what's the engine driving this whole cycle? Well, according to the source, it's money. A lot of money. We're talking over $11 billion. That's the estimated annual value of the goods and services produced by prison labor. With that much cash on the line, the argument goes, the system has a very, very powerful reason to maintain the status quo.
And here's where you can really see the nuts and bolts of that economic incentive. Look at the difference. On one hand, you have wages for prison labor that can be as low as literally $0. And on the other, a typical state minimum wage. That huge gap, that's what this argument identifies as the modern-day exploitation that's fueling that multi-billion-dollar industry.
So if we accept the premise that domestic change is off the table, what in the world does this global intervention actually look like? Well, that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle.
To get the legal path forward, we need to talk about this concept, jus cogens. The easiest way to think about it is these are the super rules of international law. They're the unbreakable, non-negotiable principles that every country has to follow. We're talking about things like the prohibition of genocide, piracy, and, this is the key for this argument, slavery. No country's local laws can just decide to ignore these.
So using that jus cogens principle as a launchpad, the source outlines a few specific ways to take action. For instance, a case could be brought to the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which goes after individuals for the worst crimes imaginable. Or there's this idea of universal jurisdiction, which basically means a court in one country could prosecute officials from another country for violating these fundamental norms. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're actual, concrete legal strategies.
Now, I know what you might be thinking.
The idea of the international community forcing a superpower to change its internal policies. It sounds pretty out there, right? But the source actually points to some major historical examples where this exact thing has happened.
And the number one example here is the fight against apartheid in South Africa. The parallel being drawn is pretty direct. Both systems were totally legal under their own domestic laws, but they both violated those fundamental international norms we just talked about. And here's the kicker. Apartheid didn't just end on its own. It fell because of massive, sustained global pressure. Sanctions, boycotts, the whole shebang.
And there are other precedents that back this up. Think about the Nuremberg trials after World War II. They established that just following orders, or it was legal here, is no defense for crimes against humanity. Or the case against Chile's Pinochet, which showed that even former heads of state aren't above the law. Each one of these cases chips away at the idea that national sovereignty is an absolute shield.
Which brings us right back to the central, really challenging question of this entire argument. If a system is truly void from its inception, if it's flawed from its very DNA, can it ever really be fixed from the inside? Or does real, meaningful change, as this argument insists, have to come from the outside? It's a huge idea, and one that really challenges how we think about the nature of justice itself.